You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to show number 138 of Modern Musicology, 138 episodes. I'm pretty amazed about that. My name is Rob Levy. I am the head honcho and dishwasher for this week, so thank you for joining us. I am joined by, of course, Mr. Alan Seiler. How are you, sir?
Hey, not too bad. How are you, Rob?
I am great. We also are joined by a very special guest, Mr. Iain Key. Iain is the author of All the Young Punks, A People's History of the Clash. And in the spirit of full disclosure, he is a comrade in arms at Louder Than War Radio. He hosts Indie Brunch, which is a fantastic show that you should all listen to each and every week. And the amount of research he does for his playlists and shows puts me to shame. So how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, no, it's great. We've been trying to get you on for a little bit. And I guess I will start with the inevitable deadly first question is what made you decide that you wanted to write a book?
Well, I've contributed over the years to a number of volumes, books about artists produced by Spenwood Books, who's a small Manchester-based publisher. Richard, who owns the company, I've known him for a while, and I've contributed books on the Jam, The Wedding Present, Shaun Ryder, things like that. And last year he approached me saying, if there was a way of doing a book with Billy Bragg, would you be interested in editing it? Because I've had Billy on my show and I know his people. So I jumped at the chance because like Billy's been the soundtrack to my life for the last 40 years as he has yours. Yeah. So obviously I agreed, and then he said, well, whilst he was sorting out the contracts and contacting Billy, he said, well, do you want to have a go at editing a book? Some of the work he'd already done, there was a number of audio interviews that needed to be transcribed, and we needed probably about another 100 pieces for the book. So that's how I got into it. He let me loose on it.
And oral histories are kind of a new thing now. For like years, everyone was doing these like well-researched, roll up your sleeves, nitpicky biographies and things. But now we're getting more and more oral histories on bands and music and artists. Do you think that's a trend, or do you think just people want something different and more personal?
I think it's probably something that's come out of the pandemic is, people have taken stock on where they are with their lives and what they've done. And then, obviously they did exist before then, but I think more and more people now getting to a point in time where they were like, they didn't have an excuse not to sit down and write a book. And then, people like Rich have given individuals the opportunity to do that about certain bands. There's certainly, there's a lot of sort of similar things that have came out over the last 4 or 5 years.
What is it about the Clash that you think people, if they don't know about the Clash, I could go on for hours, but what do you want people to take away from the Clash with this book?
I think there's a few things. The first one is they were very much the people's band, or a band for the people. Up until sort of like punk, really. Certainly sort of like in the early 70s, rock was very bloated. The musicians and artists were not really approachable. They were a bit more set aside from, the common working man, whereas with the punk thing, especially with the Clash and the Jam people like that, they used to allow fans as young as 13, 14 into the sound checks. They used to spend time after the gigs talking to people. If you met them in a pub, you could talk to them. And also they were talking about real life issues that affected the youth at the time as well. So they were on the same level. They weren't paying millions of pounds in tax and having to move abroad to avoid paying it. They were on the dole and having the same issues as the the common people were. So I think that's one of the main things. And then also, if you look at the Clash's output between 1977 and 1982, each of the albums is completely different. And I can't think of any other band, probably than maybe the Beatles, that have actually had that kind of metamorphosis over a period of time.
And I think that's an important distinction to make, because I think when when you naturally think about that era and about that style of music, the punk scene and everything, you don't really think about an output with that much variety in it.
Mm-hmm.
You think about punk being all the same, and it's really not. And especially when you dig into the Clash's stuff.
No, absolutely. I mean, you go from, I've done quite a few talks on the book so far, out and about, and one of the things that people have always commented on, that the sound of the first Clash album is kind of like the true punk sound. It's a bit tinny, it's a bit rushed. It's got a bit of a speed influence to it, whereas the Sex Pistols album was being demoed and re-recorded for the best part of 2 years. So really, Never Mind the Bollocks doesn't sound like a punk record, whereas the Clash's first album does. Then obviously you've got the American production for Give 'Em Enough Rope. You've got, I did call London Calling a hodgepodge, which somebody took to be disrespectful. I didn't mean it as disrespectful, but it is a very eclectic album, and it is probably the best double album that exists. But there are so many styles on there, and that's where I think you're getting the band's influences coming through. You've got everything from AOR to jazz to reggae. Everything's on there. And then you got Sandinista, which is very experimental, and I think at the time, it probably wasn't understood, or it was, people considered it bloated. But I mean, if you consider it now, what's on there and what influences are on there, it's a very experimental album, and I think nobody else before or since has probably done something quite as bold, let's say.
Right.
And then by the time you get to Combat Rock, they're playing stadiums.
Right.
In the Who.
Yeah. Now, I'm guessing, too, that you were like me and you never got to see them, right?
No, I'm slightly too young. So I managed to see Joe Strummer a couple of times later on, but I never saw the Clash, unfortunately.
I saw Joe at the Pogues. That's the only time I saw them. What's interesting is the Clash played St. Louis on the Combat Rock tour, but it was the same night as Laurie Anderson came here for her tour for her big multi-project thing. So like half the city didn't go see the Clash. I think like 30 people came to see the Clash in St. Louis. It's really, It's just horribly tragic. But I worked with the guy that went to the infamous New York shows. What I love about the Clash is that, and this book brings it out, is before this book, everyone I knew who saw the Clash or heard the Clash had some kind of personal stories to connect them to the Clash. And I think that that's a really extraordinary thing for a band, especially at this time, is, people are like connecting to them in ways they're not connecting to the Damned or the Pistols or some of the other, bands kicking around right now. They really had this idea of like storytelling down, and that storytelling got transferred to their fans sharing and telling stories, which is interesting.
Yeah. And it's amazing that now, I like I say, I've been going out talking to people, and people still have that affinity with the band and that passion about the band now, 40 odd years later. It's not changed at all. Other people, they'll like a band and they'll go out of fashion or whatever, but the Clash fans are as equally obsessive. Maybe that's not probably the right word, but they're equally as like switched onto them now still, and are very passionate about them.
So with the book, how did you know where to start and how did you know where to stop?
I think from the timeline in the book, it was very much a case of it being the Clash. It wasn't necessarily, all the Strummers gigs afterwards, but there needed to be a bit at the back regarding the influence and the legacy. But it was very much the Clash's career. We could have covered the 101ers, but the 101ers wasn't, that they were kind of not successful, but they were kind of known in retrospect because they were the band that Strummer was in. So rather than going all the way back to the very beginning, it was a case of starting where the Clash started and finishing really where they finished when Mick Jones. Well, after Mick Jones left, and then you had the Clash Mark II. So that was very much that. And then it was just reaching out to people and making sure that we had all the concerts, the important concerts like the Rock Against Racism thing covered. We had all of the Bond stuff covered from when they played in New York, and make sure as many voices that we could get were covered. And it's not just fans. We've got members of bands that supported the Clash, members of people that went on to form bands after speaking to Joe Strummer and the Clash. So various, it's a bit of everything.
I'm just wondering how long it took to put this together. First of all, how did you go about collecting all the different contributions that you got from people, and how long did it take for the whole thing to come together? And was there any piece that, like a particular concert or something that you wanted covered and you didn't get anything from and you had to go and find? Was there any difficulty finding coverage for what you're looking for?
To answer the last question first, no,
it was
not
like
really.
15 questions all in one.
Yeah, no. I mean, there wasn't anything really that I needed to go out and search. There were a few people that I wanted to contribute.
Yeah,
who I reached out to that I knew that had seen the band, and then there was Neil Crudd, who's also a DJ on Louder Than War. His dad used to be the photographer, like for the North Wales Gazette or something. Unfortunately, didn't have the pictures, but he actually photographed the Clash in concert at, I think, Deeside Leisure Centre in 1980. So Neil kindly wrote me a piece about that gig. But then he said, my mate Shem, he was in the support band, the Jiving Daleks. So I reached out to him and he wrote a piece for me and let me have a copy of it, like a photograph of his band. So there was quite a lot of things like that with leads coming through. How long it took? I mean, like I say, Richard gave me probably about 200 pieces, probably about 150 pieces that he'd already had in from people.
Yeah.
Like I said, there was quite a few audio transcriptions that I needed to do that of calls he'd had with people. And at first, I was going on like the Clash Facebook groups and things like that, saying, I'm writing this book, can you do this? And I wasn't really getting much of a response. And then I realised that I was keeping it separate from what I do for Louder Than War, which was probably a bit naive. So then I just wrote out to like every artist and person that I've like had on my show, and like different bands that I know. And then things thankfully came flooding in. Regarding how long it took, I think it was around June last year when Richard first approached me about it. I started work on it then. I had a initial first draft done by mid-November, and then it went off to the printers just before Christmas, and then we got the books back in, I think it was late January, early February.
Wow.
That's a fast turnaround.
Yeah.
Well, the Billy Bragg one, which is due out in October, I started. We were asking for submissions for that. Billy was asking for submissions for that when he was on tour in the States last year, but I started working on that in earnest probably in between Christmas and New Year, and Richard was as well. And I think we got the first draft of that done by the second week in February. And that's going to be 592 pages.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Once we've got all we're just going through, we're just working with the design at the moment, and photographs and things are going into it. But it's going to be about 592 pages. So
wow.
The design for that book looks great, as it does for the Clash book too.
Yeah.
Did you have any hand in the design of it?
No, that's been done by a guy called Bruce who does the layouts and everything. He said the Clash one, he says it took him 10 minutes. And I was like, yeah, but it's such a great cover though as well. It just stands out, doesn't it?
Yeah,
So,
it really does.
It totally fits like their oeuvre. Like sometimes you see these books and they don't look anything like what they're supposed to look like, and it totally does. Collecting these stories, from people you knew and people maybe you didn't, what did you learn about the band that you didn't know before?
I think something I'm not sure if it's what I didn't know, but it's probably I hadn't thought about so much until you actually start putting things together in chronological order, is obviously the journey from London and playing London pubs to then going out into the suburbs and taking, because the Pistols couldn't really play that much, so the Clash were like the first proper punk band I think that went out into like the towns and cities across England. But also they were playing the sort of smaller venues as well in the smaller towns, which you wouldn't normally get. It's not like now where you get bands playing like London, Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, and things like that. Maybe just that, but they were playing everywhere. But it wasn't just once a year. They played Manchester, I think, 8 times between 1977 and 1978. So they were just constantly out there working. And then they were obviously influencing bands to form as well. But then they went to America and they were doing the same thing there as well. So it's almost like you've got, they've taken their influence from the UK, then gone over to America, started incorporating some like old American blues artists and things like that into it, and then feeding it back to Americans. And then also soaking up all the hip hop stuff and then making that more kind of like, and promoting people like Grandmaster Flash and thing, and, just that influence. And then they came back to the UK, and then obviously they did the same thing again here.
Very much every bit of the working class band, I think.
Yeah. Which is ironic, seems at least 2 of them went to art school, and one of them was the son of a diplomat.
Yeah, which is kind of strange and weird at the same time, but you'll take it, right? Looking back, and now that it's out into the world, is there anything you wish you would have done with the book that you couldn't have done, or anybody you would have liked to have had involved?
There was probably a few things really looking back at it now. I probably would have put in more. I'd look, because obviously the Clash didn't do Top of the Pops, which was the staple TV program in the UK. But they did do other things. So maybe kind of look to put things in like that. Look possibly at other key dates that might have been there, which I've missed out. I nearly interviewed Palmolive from the Slits, but we're lit because she was like, she was Joe Strummer's one of his. Well, he lived with her. They were in a relationship for some time, and I did try to. We had a call set up, but for whatever reason, she couldn't connect at her side. And then when she could connect, I'd had to go out and do something else, and then we just never got. We just couldn't rearrange it. But I think everybody because it was the first book, it's like I probably learned quite a lot by doing it, and sort of like thinking, right, I do really need to get this. So for the Billy Bragg book, there are certain people that I've reached out for that I wanted to make sure that we had in. Yeah. Although Billy did have a big say in who he reached out to a lot of people himself, though.
I was about to say, man, your first book, and you're writing about like the Clash. That's no small feat. That's got to be daunting.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, to be fair, I didn't really think about it like that. It was just a case of I've got to get it done, and my only focus was getting it edited. I never saw any of this side of it. I never even thought that, people would want to speak to me about it, let alone me go to Birmingham and Norwich and places like that and sit in front of like 50 people to talk to them about it.
Yeah, you're now the guy in the library that's in the chair getting talked to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the difference in the experience of putting this book together and the Billy Bragg project? Because Billy was obviously involved in that one. How much difference does that make?
A big difference, because other than one person who I wanted to make sure was in the book, everybody else has come directly to us, either through Billy or through his mailing list.
Yeah.
Or, so that's been a completely different experience, not having to reach out to people for things. So, but then I'm going to start working on book 3 soon as well.
Okay, yeah. Do you want to talk about
spoilers?
Book
3? I've messaged a few people about it. It's a well-known Manchester band from the 1980s,
and I have thought about that. By the way,
yeah, but I'm focusing on the music from the 1980s and not people's characters from later on and nowadays. So it is very much about the band and their music. But yeah, I've been discovered. It's the 40th anniversary of their best album next year, probably. So going to aim to get it out for them.
Nice.
You brought up something when you brought up Manchester, and it made me think back to the Clash. At this time, England's very much a country of scenes. You got the scene in Sheffield, you got the scene in Liverpool, you've got Manchester, and everything, and their brothers in London. The Clash were pretty much able to get everywhere, which is really, really fascinating, just in terms of not, like you said, playing, but just being popular everywhere. Because I know people that like bands, they're in Manchester and they love these bands from Manchester, but then they hate these bands from Liverpool just because of city differences. It's like football, except with bands. The Clash pretty much are universally respected by like anybody in the North and the South and the Midlands. It's really interesting.
I think they were the first ones that really went out there and did it, though. So they predated, probably predated. Although there was probably some of the stuff going on in Sheffield with the electronic things, it probably wasn't coming out quite as much until late 78, early 79. So the Clash were probably there about a year before. With Liverpool, the Clash playing at Eric's in Liverpool was as important to people like Ian McCulloch and Pete Wiley as the Sex Pistols were playing in Manchester. That they sort of like sparked, that kind of scene there. And I mean, God bless his soul, Mike Peters. I mean, he turned up with a demo tape at Eric's when he was in a band called The Toilets and was given a gig supporting the Clash that night.
It's really fascinating, the DIY of that era too. It seems like a band could just show up and play anywhere now, much more than they can today.
I mean, in Manchester, I mean, we're lucky. I mean, we've got so many venues now and so many people that have put gigs on. And probably about a month ago, I was in the centre of Manchester for one gig, and I think there was like 18 gigs happening in Manchester on that Friday night, and 6 of them were probably within half a mile of where I was. So, there are a lot of venues and a lot of opportunities for people to play. The only problem is there's not always enough people to go and see the bands that are playing.
Do you think that All the Young Punks is going to make people rethink the Clash and their sort of position in music?
I'd like to think that the position in music is kind of already set. I think, if people, when they start rolling off names, it's like the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, Led Zeppelin, and then they get onto the Clash. There's a few people that I've had feedback from who weren't like necessarily a fan of the band, who didn't pre-order the book. They were surprised maybe how much they'd done and how much they'd changed, because they'll have come to Clash. There's a lot of people that are our age or slightly younger. They'll their first experience of the Clash was "Should I Stay or Should I Go?" being on a jeans commercial in 1991. So and so they're then working back and sort of like experiencing other stuff.
See, over here it's interesting because a lot of people discovered the Clash through the Globe by Big Audio Dynamite.
Oh, right, okay.
So they sort of got a back end on that. And I have met at least 7 or 8 people within the last 2.5 years, probably since the pandemic or so, that are now discovering the Clash. I mean, they're young, but it's kind of interesting. They have that they're getting that timelessness that my generation thinks of with like the Stones or the Beatles or, Zeppelin or things like that. They're kind of entering that terrain, which I think is interesting.
Wow. Yeah, it is interesting. It's like you were saying about Laurie Anderson, though. Laurie Anderson in the UK is almost known as a novelty artist for Oh Superman.
Yeah.
She was played on John Peel, and then she ended up getting played on daytime Radio 1 because that became a hit. But most people wouldn't necessarily know who she was.
I think that's very similar here. Like, I just don't think that the general public is that aware of Laurie Anderson. And I don't even think that Oh Superman is the one that most people here would recognize.
No.
MTV really latched on to Language is a Virus from Outer Space and played that song a lot. And I think that'd probably be the only one that most
I'll have to go like listen. I've never heard of it, so I'll have to go check it out.
Oh, it's a great song. I love it so much.
and Home of the Brave was such a movement for like the arts that I think that's it. I don't think she's got an album, but did you hear from anybody sort of like connected with, obviously you mentioned something about trying to get a hold of, some people that know Joe, but were you able to talk to Paul or Mick or anybody from the Clash and kind of get them to be on the periphery of this or know about it?
No, we did approach the management, But I think the Clash's view after they did, or the remaining members' view after they did the sound system box set in, I think it's 2012, 2013, that was very much the final project that they were getting involved in. So we did approach the management and they politely said, thanks, but no thanks, but give us a copy of the book when it's done. And then Richard had been down at the Mick Jones exhibition and left a couple of copies there, which we believe got back to the management, because then we got an email from the management saying, oh, can you send us a few copies of the book? So they have got it and they have seen it, but I don't know. We've not had any feedback. But I did speak to Rodent, who was the original roadie who then left the Clash and then went to work for the Sex Pistols.
He's got stories. That guy's got to have stories.
He's got a lot of stories.
Yeah.
Some of which were unusable for the book and unrepeatable. But yeah, he was a character.
I was thrilled at just the sheer breadth of different types of people you had with the interviews. I mean, I thought that was like really fantastic. And some of these folks, I'm like, man, this is their own separate story. You know?
Absolutely. I mean, it's like Rachel Felder, who's a journalist over in the States, her bit, that just was fantastic because she'd gone to see the Clash at Bonds, and then years later, she's the guy that she ended up marrying. They're separated now, but the guy she ended up marrying on the first date that they had, they were talking about music, and she was like, "Oh, I was 14. I went to see the Clash at Bonds, blah blah blah," and the husband Speed turned around and goes, "Oh yeah, I was working in the studio at the time with Mick mixing the tracks." So it's just like, wow. But no, I mean, like I say, there were certain people that I reached out to a lot of people. So I've got like Jane Savage, who was the PR person in the 90s for Suede and Pulp. I'm friends with Jane, so it's like I knew that she was a fan of Strummer, so I was like, well, I definitely want to get her included. And there was quite a few people like that I knew that had seen the Clash, and I was going through Facebook posts, having a look at who I knew that was friends of bands, and then I was kind of like looking at individuals and seeing if they'd ever mentioned the Clash anywhere, and then jumping on that.
It's pretty incredible in terms of research, how you had to approach the research kind of from a more organic point of view than the, time in the library looking at things. I do love the visuals in the book, though. You have a lot of like flyers and artwork and photographs and stuff. That part of it, I think, really makes the story hit home.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, that's apart from the pictures that people have obviously taken themselves and sent in, I would say 90% of the other stuff is from a website called Black Market Clash.
Oh,
there's a guy called Graham Jones who set that site up. He's actually was a Labour MP in the UK for a while as well. But he saw the Clash in 1984 at the Apollo in Manchester. And he set this site up, which is absolutely amazing. It's got all like everything that you see in the book, like all the press cuttings, everything. So I'd approached him and said, look, this is what I'm doing. Would you be all right if I used a couple of things? And he just said, yeah, just use what you want. So nice. I spent like probably 2 days just going through his website, just saving all the images, going, I'll have that one, I'll have that one. And especially, I think some of like the American tour posters and things like that, like there seems to be more effort made in some of the American stuff than there is in the UK, where it's just the same poster and then somebody just writes the name of the town on or something. Whereas like the American ones, there's a bit more effort made, which I think is great.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, they sunk a lot of money into them over here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when it's probably the time you get This Is Radio Clash and you get Should I Stay or Should I Go and Straight to Hell, the label is pouring a ton. They were all over MTV with Rock the Casbah. I think for many people that was the gateway to like British 80s music, was Rock the Casbah. It's like I think at least one day I saw that at least 7 times on MTV. Which may or may not have been my first sort of deep dive into them. I think I heard Jenny Jones before that, but I distinctly remember them being a huge thing in America, and then realizing, oh, they're British, and oh, and they were in many ways my gateway to punk. right?
Mhm.
Them and the Buzzcocks. I did it completely backwards than most Americans that started with the Pistols. I started with the Buzzcocks
Yeah.
and the Clash, which you could say are not even technically like punk. But yeah, I think the big difference is over here. They got a lot of money put into them, and they got a reputation over here for being a party band. It's like, people I don't think over here really got the politics of the Clash, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I suppose it's slightly different, isn't it, at the time
Yeah.
from what was happening in the UK and what was happening with Reagan in America, I guess.
Yeah. Do you think their politics made them so popular in Britain that they were able to speak to all those different voices, or do you think that sort of may have hurt them at some point?
I don't think it did them any damage. I think that's one of the key things is why the youth were able to talk to them, because they felt the same. They felt disenfranchised. They felt that they didn't have the opportunities to do things, and they had to go and do it themselves. So I think that really helped them.
And I know you talked about the process of putting the book together, but I'm curious how you juggled, as much time as you put in to your radio show, because I think out of all the people I've known in 30 years of radio, you put more into any radio show than anyone I've ever known. How did you find the time to do the interviews, do the editing, reread the copies, track all these people down, and then still do the radio show and everything? Do you have a TARDIS? Can you bend time? What is your sort of secret to working? And when you're doing music that much or one thing that much, it's like, okay, I want to stop. And how did you not lose enthusiasm, and how did you sort of fit all that into a microcosm of you, sort of?
To be honest, I mean, I've got a day job which keeps me very, very leveled.
Yeah.
I've worked in the telecoms industry for probably about 28 years now. So I've got quite a steady job, and that keeps me nice and grounded. So I appreciate that anything I do outside of that, I'm quite lucky to have the opportunity to do it. So I tend to, for the radio show, I do the interview on the Monday, and then I edit the interview. And then on a Tuesday, I will kind of plan out the radio show, split it up, like edit the interview into it, and then probably record that on the Tuesday. Wednesday, Thursday, I will then spend probably 5 hours in the evening editing the book, or certainly as much as I can bear, because sometimes it's like pieces are just so long and you just like you just can't concentrate on it. And then over the weekend, I'll see my fiance, and then on a Sunday, I'd probably spend, or I'll see my son, and then on a Sunday, I'd probably then spend the whole day doing it that way. And then certainly towards, I think it was possibly August, October. No, August, I think it was September last year, I took a week off, and then I just spent a day just working on the book constantly. But by that point, most of it was already done. It was a case of just getting it into shape.
Because I always think the people that edit the books are sort of the unsung heroes of everything too. Did you have an outside editor to help you, or was it all you, or how did?
No, it was myself and Richard.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought.
Richard done some of it. The rest of it was me.
Yeah, I pretty much assumed
we had somebody proofread it as well, obviously.
Yeah,
but.
Yeah.
I assumed so much of this was on you with Richard, but I wanted to double check that. Speaking, no pressure here, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But your high fidelity moment is now. What are your 5 favorite Clash songs?
Oh, bloody hell.
Or give us 2 or 3.
Right, well, my favourite Clash song is Safe European Home, which I write about in the book, why that's my favourite. White Man in Hammersmith Palais. I think definitely. I love the live version of Complete Control that was on the live album that came out a few years ago as well. The intros, that's brilliant. But honestly, anything really. I mean, there's nothing that. I mean, I love Sandinista, and people do flag it off, but I tell you, you put that on when you're working through spreadsheets and you just like doing menial office tasks in the afternoon, and it flows by. It's brilliant.
This frightens me because when I'm on a writing deadline and I've got stuff to do, because I'm writing about a lot of really mundane stuff with my day job, that's one of my go-to records.
Yeah.
Yeah, that and like Sergeant Pepper and some other stuff. Yeah. Why is Sandinista such a divisive record for Clash fans?
I think it's because it is so different from anything else. I mean, if you think when it came, I mean, it was recorded in 1980 in New York. So when it come out, I mean, when did like when did Melly Mel come out and The Message and things like that? Was that 79, 80?
79, 80, 81-ish. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. Yeah.
So that would have been the first kind of hip hop and rap and thing crossover and thing like that people would have probably heard. So then you get the Clash doing things like that, and it's like, what's this? It's not the angry stuff. It's not the rebel rousing stuff.
Yeah.
It's not something like I Fought the Law, which people can immediately latch onto. There's like long instrumental pieces, there's dub bits, there's bits that are backwards. You've got Mickey Gallagher's kids singing Career Opportunities. It's just out there. I mean, and it probably is, you could make a fantastic 12-track single album out of it. But, I don't think, I think there was probably a couple of tracks which they didn't put on there, but I think pretty much everything that they recorded, they threw at that album. And some people might see that as a lack of quality control, and other people see it as being a brave career decision.
Right. Following up on a double album with a triple album is kind of bold. And what I want to ask you about is, the Clash had their first couple of albums out, and nothing really made a dent in the US until their third album, London Calling, which was driven mainly by Train in Vain. But the title song got some like airplay on rock radio and things. There's that 3-album run, that one, Sandinista and Combat Rock, which all did really well in the US. But the thing that going back and looking at this, I don't recall ever hearing a single track from Sandinista on the radio, on MTV, anywhere. So I'm kind of curious as to how that album did so well in the US. Was it just carried on from the success of London Calling?
I think it was off the back of the gigs at Bonds as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
So I think that would have probably been it. And I think, Magnificent Seven and, possibly would have been played on American radio stations as well, on college radio.
Maybe college radio. That's not something I had in my area.
You are getting sort of the very early stages of like indie underground radio too, right? And at this time, particularly in New York and San Francisco, you're getting the pirate radio model from Britain coming to America. And a lot of the times they're playing hip hop, or they're playing like avant-garde noise kind of stuff, right? Stuff that nobody's playing. But a lot of the times that was people just coming in with their like 12 records and playing an hour. So I think they really, at a time when they were sort of getting commercial in Britain, they are sort of like just getting indie in America. And then they sort of flipped the switch, I think, when they broke over here. That's just sort of an idea, but I could be completely insane.
Yeah. Because the Clash didn't play Top of the Pops and things like that, the singles weren't, all getting into the top 20, top 30 of the singles charts in the UK. So things like the Call Up don't think even got into the top 40. So there was still a live draw, but on singles sales, they weren't, having hit after hit. We had Shakin' Stevens having 22 top 10 hits in the 1980s, and the Clash didn't have any.
Right.
So
they at least had, like, as far as like top 40 play here in the US, and at least Casbah and Should I Stay, both did really well here, which obviously propelled that album into their highest sales here. Yeah. But, Train in Vain did that well too. But it's interesting that they had consistent album success when they didn't have consistent radio success. Yeah. And I think that is, just plays back to them being the people's band. That they were adopted here because they're so British. I feel like they're so I think some of the things that they talk about are universal, but they're very specifically British in sort of the topics that they address.
Possibly, yeah.
And I think if they would have toured here more, that might have helped it. I know when they did tour, it was like a deal breaker for a lot of people. I mean, there are people I know that saw The Clash that had never heard any of their records before, but just like went for word of mouth.
It's another thing though, isn't it? I mean, in the UK, you know, they play in leisure centres and old theatres, and then when you look at like the names of the American venue, you know, they're playing baseball halls and sports halls.
Shea Stadium, Shea Stadium,
yeah, and then Shea Stadium as well. Yeah,
I used to have a poster from the Shea Stadium gig. I have no idea where it is, but yeah. So with the book, what was your favorite part of the whole process of doing it? Was it just sort of like celebrating the Clash, or was it like, this is my first book, or, you know, what sort of was the energy for it?
It was the moment where, because at first, because obviously I do editing for Louder Than War as well.
Yeah.
So I'm used to editing maybe 1 or 2 pieces a week, or writing a little bit here and there and doing that. But then when you're faced by the sheer volume of the Clash book, it was like, oh Christ, this is a job now. Which the beautiful thing about Louder Than War has always been, it's not my proper job, it's not my full-time job, so I can dip in and out of it and enjoy it for that. Whereas this then became a job. So when I flipped it into, well, I'm reading stuff which I would want to read if I'd like to buy this book. So it was that moment when I flipped it into, right, I'm actually going to enjoy doing this because it's actually something that I would, you know, I'm getting to see this before anybody else. So I think it was that mindset change then allowed me to enjoy the process.
Nice.
But at first it was like, oh my God, what have I let myself in for?
Did you underestimate what you were getting into when you set out to do this, you think?
I didn't really think about it, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I think it's like, I know, I mean, it's like the radio thing. I mean, when Nigel first said about doing a radio show for Louder Than War, I was like, I'll give it a go. Not, you know, I'll buy a microphone for my Mac, and it's like doing a mixtape, innit?
Yeah.
You know, and nearly 4 years later, I'm still doing it and like interviewing people every week. And it's, I never, you know, I could never have imagined when I first started doing it that it'd be turned into what it's become.
It's interesting how when you get that itch, right? I don't know how to describe it other than like you hear something and you're like, I want to write about this, or I want to play it to other people, or I want to talk to these people, right? Yeah. So that is such an instantaneous outlet. Like, okay, I've got a radio show, I can put this on and get it out to the people.
Yeah.
But having to write about it and then wait to see the finished thing get out there, that's the thing that would drive me nuts. And that's the thing that you did with this that I'm like, I know this has got to be driving him nuts because he just wants this out so bad. That's just my hunch. But
yeah, I mean, I think to a point when you get to the point where it's finished, you've done your bit, the designers put the pictures in, then at that point you can actually take stock and take a step back from it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get the print files so you can see what it's going to look like. And it's like, that looks good. That's all right. And then it's after a couple of weeks, it's like, oh, I wonder when we're going to get them back now because I want to see them. Mm-hmm. And I got a paperback proof copy through, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. But then when I actually saw the actual book, I was just like, wow, this is special, because obviously the proof is just the paperback.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But when you actually get the final thing and hold it, and it's like, wow, it is a proper book. And I think what the interesting thing was, there's a lot of people that knew that I was doing it, and then when they've got a copy of the book or I've seen them, they're like, oh, it's a proper book. You know, so many people were just thinking it was going to be straight, you know, print on demand kind of thing on Amazon. But when they actually see it and realize it's, you know, and they were like, oh, because they just assumed that I was doing it and self-publishing it. And I was like, no, I've got it's a proper publisher that's asked me to do it. It's not just like a vanity project.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Tony?
Yes, Joe?
We need to make a new promo.
For the Watchathon of Rassilon?
Yes, the podcast where we talk about every episode of Doctor Who in order.
Well, what do we need to say about it?
Actually, I think that pretty much covers it.
Great.
The Watchathon of Rassilon.
It's a Doctor Who podcast.
And a proud member of the ESO Network.
Okay, I've got an off-the-wall question, and it's specifically about the music. I'm just wondering, what covers of Clash songs have you heard that you either really like or really dislike?
You know what? A few years ago, there was I think it was Mojo magazine or one of those. They did two CDs of Clash. I think there was Joy Zipper. I think it was did Hitsville UK, which I really liked. Mm-hmm. Pete Wiley's version of Stay Free. Pete's an absolute star, so it's like I love anything that he does. I wouldn't say, I'm trying to think if there's anything I really dislike. I don't think there is anything that's been completely murdered by anybody. It's not like Hallelujah. You've got like Leonard Cohen's version, and then you've got, you've got his version. John Cale's version is fantastic, and then you've got people on American Idol and Pop Idol murdering it. It's like, but no, I don't think. I can't think of any Clash. I mean,
I'm not a fan of the Rancid cover.
Which I've not heard it. Which
I'll send you this. There's Sony put out an album over here a couple years ago of Clash tributes, and it's sort of like in that '90s sort of like painfully embarrassing era of like Blink 182 and Sublime, and it's a lot of that kind of stuff. But they got Rancid to do a Clash cover, and I think there's a Boss Tones one too. I'll find this for you, and I'll send it to you. So,
Lars from Rancid obviously did Billy Bragg cover.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
As well.
The reason I thought of that question is because we have a sort of folk group over here called the Indigo Girls who did Clamp Down, and it's very different from the Clash's Clamp Down, and a lot of people don't like it. I really like it. I think it's really cool. But
the National did
so
a fantastic.
Different.
Yeah, the National did a fantastic cover of that too.
Oh yeah, I hadn't heard that one.
I'm trying to remember there's a Spanish group who did. I can't remember what they're called now. They did Spanish Bombs.
Nice.
All female band.
Is that Nouvelle Vague?
No,
they did one too. Yeah,
I'm trying to find it. Try to find Heinz, Hinds.
Oh, Heim. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right.
They've done an absolutely fantastic version of Spanish Bombs.
Yeah. I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, I did too.
They're a pretty cool band. I dig them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Three sisters.
Yeah. No, that version is great as well.
Awesome.
So we're close to time, and I didn't want to let you go without letting you tell us, one, where you can find the book, two, where they can find you, sort of what you're up to. Give us the full Iain.
Blimey, right. So the book is available. Obviously, it would be nice if people bought it from the publisher, which is Spenwood Books. I need to remember if I should know if it's co.uk or it's spenwoodbooks.com. It is available on Amazon and from all good bookshops. We haven't got a US distributor at the moment. However, there will be soon. Certainly by the end of the year.
It's popping into bookstores here, though. I've seen it in a couple places. Yeah,
well, that's good that they're booking it, but we're actually getting a proper distributor. Well, I say proper, not disparaging anybody else. We're getting a distributor in the US and Australia, who are also going to be doing the Billy Bragg book as well. We'll shortly be announcing when the details of the Billy Bragg book, when that's going to be available, but that'll be available worldwide as well. I am on Facebook. I've got my group, Iain Key's Indie Brunch, Louder and More Radio. I am on Twitter as Iain Key. I'm on Instagram as Iain Key, and Blue Sky's Iain Key as well, I think.
And we'll include, these links in our show description as our episode goes out. Before we let you go, can you give us a little preview of the Billy Bragg book?
How would you like to? So it's 592 pages.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It is a paperback rather than a hardback, and I think it's going to, because Richard, when he obviously has to sort out the printers and things in advance and whatever, he puts all the information into a computer and it comes back and tells him things about it. So I think it's going to weigh something like 1.7 kilos.
Okay.
So, but it's like I said, Billy's been completely involved in it. So we have, as well as like official photographs from throughout his career, we've got personal pictures that Billy shared with us from going back to the early 70s. So there's a lot of stuff about Riff Raff in there. There's a lot of things written by the early members of Riff Raff. So it covers his whole career, really, all the way through. And we've got, he's obviously got different people involved. Like the Clash book, interestingly, it's split because there's a lot of stuff about Billy when he first started off in the UK. But then he goes over to Europe. He spent a lot of time in America. So there's a whole things, about his tours in America. Rob, you've contributed to it.
Yeah.
And it goes up to, I think the last tour stuff is the end of last year when he came back from America.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then there's other people that have important people that have influenced his career that have contributed as well.
One of my former bosses is a big Bragg fan. Mm-hmm. So I think this might have to be a birthday or Christmas present for her. I think she'll enjoy it. She's seen him, I don't know how many times.
Yeah. So the weirdest thing was, because when I did the Clash book, I was listening to, there's a lot of bootlegs online. So I was listening to bootleg gigs and things. Mm-hmm. And I was doing the same when I was doing the Billy Bragg book as well. And I was listening to a gig that he'd done in September last year in the States, and obviously he's talking in between songs. I'm there typing away and reading things, and then he starts talking about this book, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds good." And then I realised I was like, "Oh, it's this book."
That's
I had to go back and check it, and it was just like, "Well, yeah, this is what I'm doing now."
Oh, that's fantastic! That's great. All right, well, thank you so much, Iain, for joining us and talking about this book. This has been an absolute pleasure having you with us.
No, thank you for inviting me on. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, sorry, it took a while to come together, but
yeah, but it's worth the wait.
Yes.
No, thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.